The Proleptic Journal of a Shite-Extractor Tractor Man by Scott Waller. 4. One day later. I bumped into Dennis at work. He reassured me that my messages were going out and would continue to do so long as I followed protocol. I have, so I'll assume you're getting them. I didn't speak to him for long because he was busy, as usual. I think I already mentioned that he was in the middle stratum and that I would explain what that means. Is that right? Okay, here goes. The strata system. I am in the lower stratum. Dennis, like all high-level technicians, is middle stratum. The top manager of Cheerily is in the upper stratum. There are, then, 3 strata in our society, upper, middle and lower. I suppose I should also mention the outcasts, who drop out the strata system completely and mostly live in outzones. In terms of population, the upper stratum, sometimes called the Darvosians, is tiny. The middle stratum forms the majority, while the lower stratum comes a close second. That's how it works here, but in the Ray Diplases, I think it's a bit different. There they have fewer middle strata. Now, before you go thinking that we've brought back a caste system or the Ancien Regime estates or anything like that, I need to make clear that these are not birth groups, but rather something closer to your socio-professional categories. I learnt that term on a neuromentary. You believed that everyone was equal before the law, and you pretended that everyone had equal opportunities. We, on the other hand, all know that such talk was just a sugary social fiction about some mythical freedom designed to help swallow the bitter pill of real social inequality. As far as I've heard, the way it worked was that you used to say that everybody's lot in life was due to their ability or lack thereof. That way, the poorest were supposed to blame themselves for their own poverty, while the rich could perpetually pat themselves on the backs and get more fun out of themselves than compulsive masturbators. That way of thinking sounds pretty nasty, and thankfully we have done away with it. Our society no longer believes in your fairy tales about equal rights. We know we are not born equal because our genetic dispositions are not the same, but that's not a problem. What is important is that society caters for our particular dispositions appropriately by providing work and leisure opportunities that best suit us. It is often pointed out in educational neuromentaries that if we really had equal rights, we would have to be truly equal. This would make us all the same, and who wants that? Variety is, after all, the spice of life. It's our differences and diversity that help us flourish. Through trial, error, and much research and experimentation, we have come to see that a system of segmented entitlements is a more appropriate way of allowing different talents to work in a complementary and harmonious fashion. Segmented entitlements means that everybody gets their own tailor-made rights and duties according to their stratum. But underlying those segmented entitlements is a universal right. Everyone has a right to be happy. In order to realize that right, we must stay in our ranks. Otherwise, everybody loses out. Take me, for example. I belong to the lower stratum. But does that mean I have lower value? Of course not. I have a right to happiness as much as a Darvosian upper stratum. It's society's job to make sure that I find happiness, and that is precisely what society does. Before, it used to be said that individuals have a right to pursue happiness. But what is the point of granting people the right to pursue happiness if they don't attain it? It's like according with great fanfare the universal right to a nutty frolic with Marilyn Monroe and Cleopatra on the dry beaches of the Maldives. It makes far more sense to guarantee people the right to the object of that pursuit than to the pursuit itself. A society worthy of that name must provide a home, food and happiness to all its members. That's what our society does. I cannot begin to explain all the comforts and entertainment at my disposal to provide me with the means to attain my happiness. But this way of thinking only became clear to everyone at the time of the Hedonic Revolution, which was the great struggle by governments and large companies for us all to obtain a real right to happiness. The middle stratum gets less of the entertainment happiness than us because they have to work harder. They consider work to be both a duty and a privilege. They sometimes come from genetically modified stock through lab intervention, but mostly they are born with better genes bestowed by mum and dad. Although a majority of them end up in the same stratum as their parents, quite a few middle-class kids get declared lower strata when they reach adulthood. More rarely, lower strata are born with the right genetic disposition and enough will to become good managers, and can get awarded stratum promotion during their education. Middle strata tend to be a bit bigger and cleverer than us. They have greater aptitudes and usually enjoy the perk of living longer too. We have a mixed birthing system. That means that some people have real births, while others get a gestation company to do the dirty work, so to speak. You know, all that uncomfortable, embarrassing, gooey body stuff. As you might have guessed, for us, sex has little to do with reproduction. In fact, human duo sex is not the big fashion with us the way it was with you. But for those who do go in for it, technology has enabled us to remove some sexual secretions emanating from the human body. Special synthetic gels and fluids not only lubricate, but also function as contraceptives, hygiene, disinfectors, energy boosters, skin replenishers, and pleasure enhancers. There is a range of options that includes tingling sensation, muscle decontractors, orgasm extension, etc. As for me, I can't have children. When I was young, my mother accepted a scheme in which parents were paid off in order to have sterile children because the authorities were trying to stabilize the population at the time. There weren't many takers for this scheme because it was controversial and, in the end, short-lived. The reason why it was controversial was because it was a throwback to the age of the GCC, the Great Climate Crisis. That was a time when the world was thrown into disarray by an intensification of destructive and unpredictable weather patterns and a series of climatic disasters. In order to sort out a solution, global and corporate leaders got together at some luxury resort in the Alps. I know that because the history neuromentries call it the Great Global Reordering of the Alpine Conference. Their drastic measures to meet the challenges for humanity mainly involved mass relocation, mass human sterilization of around 500 million women, and mass human and animal culling. Such extreme and exceptional measures were necessary in order to face up to a supreme and exceptional situation. The human population/resources ratio was totally unsustainable. Some people had to lose out if the rest of us were to survive. A sizable portion of our species were obliged to make the ultimate sacrifice of their lives. The numbers are debated, but I think it was around 1 billion. And we, their descendants, are grateful for that sacrifice and honour their loss every year in a solemn public ceremony. Speaking as one of those descendants, I am especially moved when I think of the heroism they were forced to endure. Besides, it suited my mother who had a rare illness and needed money for her treatment. The idea of population reduction was probably good. I remember Dennis mentioning this to me when I told him about my mother. He said that she did something humane and praiseworthy. It's in everybody's interest to reduce numbers if we want to have a fair share of society's goods over a decent lifespan. More people means less goodies per person. You see, we live a lot longer than you. Medical advances made it possible to live to over 150 years. And most people, in theory, could live well beyond their century. That can cause problems of its own. More on that topic later. There was a time when people tried to modify children genetically for specific functions, but that resulted in anomalies. The attempt to make genetically modified vigils was a case in point. Decades ago, people were genetically programmed by child-rearing corporations to become vigils, security monitors, who were badly needed at that time. But vigils became redundant, because it turned out that intelligent droids can do all their work. It was all the rage. Buy vigil genes and your children will be guaranteed a great job for life. Companies sold parents vigil gene modifications and promised their children exciting, lifelong employment in which they would be working on their feet for long stretches, a physical effort which they were genetically calibrated to perform like a song. That was when being strapped in for long hours was regarded with suspicion. Thousands of people bought into it because it was the only gene mods available to ordinary folks' price range. But 20-odd years later, mechanical vigil technology ousted human vigils, who were all sacked. Many ex-vigils couldn't cope and went to pot. Sadly, quite a few of them terminated their existence in their prime. A maverick lawyer took up the battle on their behalf and won the case. Surprisingly, since the gene mod company made promises to clients, they were held to be responsible for fulfilling them. Although the company fought the legal battle tooth and nail, they eventually had to cough up for the re-employment of ex-vigils. People learn from that mistake, and making job-specific humans to order today is no longer the done thing. Anyways, I think I've written enough tonight, and I'm not sure if I've explained things properly. I suppose you'll get a better idea as I reveal more details in later installments. I'm going to activate a neurosleeper program in order to take me from neurosleep to deep sleep on the quickest setting. Good night. 2 days later. Busy day yesterday, so I didn't speak write anything. But it's the weekend now. Since the Great Time Reform, which rationalised the chaotic calendar system that you left us, we have a 10-day week. You still had a 7-day week, which didn't divide properly into a month. Our months consist of 3 full weeks and a half week. There are 10 months, plus a mid-year half month of 15 or 16 days in a year, and 35 days in a month. There are 10 days in the first 3 weeks of the month, and 5 days in the last week. Standard weekends last 3 days in a 10-day week, and 2 in a short week. Your 35 days divide into 5 weeks of 7 days, with a 2-day weekend, i.e. 7-day week, 2-day weekend, 7, 2, 7, 2, 7, 2, 7, 2. For us, 35 days look like this: 10-day week, 3-day weekend, 10, 3, 10, 3, 5, 2. As you can see, we get an extra day weekend, but that is just the default pattern. In truth, most people's weekend lengths vary. Anyway, I was going to tell you about what happened to me yesterday. I had a funny repair situation at work. I was belled by Mr. Finn himself. He sent me out to a private address to fix a broken down DHDES, domestic human detritus evacuation system, at the back of a house. It took ages to clear the system, and the silly woman who owned the house wasn't very welcoming at all. You usually get a gesture of hospitality, a drink, and a bicky if you're really lucky, but here nothing, not even a glass of water. And she was very rude to me, making it clear that my presence was an annoyance to her. I tried to explain that with the kind of problems she had, repair work takes a long time, but she just scowled at me like it was my fault. Well, that got on my nerves, so I did something I shouldn't have. I messed up her heating program system, which was hooked up to the evacuation system. It's nothing too serious, the sort of thing that can be easily passed off as an innocent mistake. The net result is that she might find things going a little colder or hotter than she expects until she gets her automated household ergo system asterisk to set about finding the fault and providing a solution. It's a shame, because I usually look forward to getting called out. It doesn't happen all that often. Apart from the occasional busy patch, my backside is mostly parked in a strapping pod. So how does the company afford to keep you on, you must wonder? Well, that's the beauty of the thing. What with my bioenergy and my mental availability contract, I practically pay myself. All I have to do is feed my belly, so the pod I'm hooked up to converts my digestion energy into machine running energy, and lo and behold, cheerily gets a healthy source of fuel. Much of my work, while I'm on standby, is paid for by a pork promotion observation research company that works in tandem with cheerily. The pork provides a lot of the material, neurodramas, neuroads, vidverts and so on, I enjoy when I'm strapped in. While I'm consuming samples of this kind of entertainment, the pork is observing me. It culls the results for market operations. I like most of the stuff they serve up, so sometimes I hardly believe I'm actually getting paid for consuming it. At the moment, I'm also getting a fair bit of good nosh for naught too. That's because I'm participating in a food manufacturer's quality improvement program. They propose all sorts of gastronomical delights. They record my reactions to these treats with their instruments and survey my response, along with that of thousands of others like me. The advantage for the food company is that they can gather information that helps them to market products for middle strata who tend to buy posh nosh. The advantage for me is twofold. I can eat lots of tasty grub, and the food company gives me free time vouchers that I can cash in at my company to get holiday hours. The drawback for me is that I have to put tubes in my nose and mouth for my troubles, but it's worth it for the stuff they give me to eat. True, my weakness for free grub programs has given me a bit of a belly, yet since I'm not planning to join any beauty pageant, I needn't worry my head about it too much. Luckily, there are drugs that can speed up your metabolism. That said, you mustn't overdo them. It's well known that popping a pile of these drugs over a long period makes your limbs go gammy and increases your chance of illness when you get very old. But I don't need to worry about that, because it won't affect my PE scheme, which I suppose I'll have to explain later. Back to my exciting outing. I usually start out cheery when I get to drive in the EE tractor and do some work with my hands. Getting out of the station, seeing people going about their business, spending time in new neighbourhoods, breathing a bit of outside air. It all makes for a nice change. At the beginning, I used to be a bit embarrassed ringing at doorbells, given what I do and everything. But whether people like it or not, our function is absolutely indispensable to society. Without us, where would we all be? Back where you lot are, I suppose. Anyways, today my good cheer turned sour at that miserable woman's house. The area was nice, a leafy, middle stratum enclosed residence. It is closed up not so much for fear of crime as in your day, but to keep a record of who comes in and when, in case the data is needed. The lady who answered the door was polite. I thought I was speaking to the owner at first, but she turned out to be the housekeeper. A human housekeeper, I marvelled in my head, because the householder's stand-in is usually a housekeeping android. This housekeeper was a lower stratum. Apart from having to deal with people like me, she looks after several houses in the condominium, overseeing domestic events and making sure that the cleaning and the maintenance androids are working all right. She explained to me that the house owner had once lived with the father of her children. She was one of those rare breeds that allow their kids to sleep in the house all week until they're 12. That is dedicated parenting, because children start to get awkward at around 10 as hormonal changes kick in, at which point even old-fashioned parents generally send their kids to board at training and learning schools. Naturally, the house was equipped with all the mechanical breeding facilities, including a top-notch nanny droid. But even so, you have to admire the woman's conviction, given that such outmoded home parenting practices are a bit frowned on today. As for her evacuation system, it was a very complicated and messy business. I had to open up the whole apparatus. Things had got clogged up in there for days, so it stank to high hell. As protocol requires, I isolated the area, gassed the place with anti-stink substances, and was wearing my suit and mask. The waste was partly treated, so it didn't have the pong of its wholesome purity, which almost deals you a knockout blow when it's too awkward to wear a mask. My job was not made easier by the owner, who was working at home. She kept nagging at me on the household interphone, watching me on her mobile cameras wherever I went, telling me to get on with it or do something about the horrible smell that was creeping over to the other side of the house in which she was taking refuge. I don't know what she was moaning about. It could only have been the disinfectant or decomposition agents that she could smell. All that was depressing enough. Then I had to clear out the whole system before I could start it up again. We have robotic suckers, prodders and deblockers, so we don't have to use our hands or anything, but I did get my suit nastily splashed. After much poking, stirring, flooding, dousing, tube cleaning, it turned out that there was a dead cat in our pipes. Naturally, we have to report this kind of thing and take the corpse, no matter how mangled the poor creature is, back to the docking station just in case it is claimed or some legal action results. In this case, it was little more than black gunk stuck to a cat skeleton, but it might contain important evidence. When I told the owner about the cat, she went ballistic on me, as though I was accusing her of putting it there. Though I must admit, I couldn't help thinking that it would be funny if it turned out to have been her, and she got into trouble for it. I used to have a cat named Tiddles. It was a clone cat. You only get real ones in zoos these days. It used to belong to the previous occupant of my mobile residency unit slot. When he moved, he left its cat and its license. The bloody thing kept dying on me. Of course, with clone pets, you can get them recloned, but clones get weaker each time they're reconstituted from their remains. When I had to get it recloned twice in 1 year, I realised that the game was up and got rid of it before the license ran out. Otherwise I would have to pay the full reconstitution fee myself, if I'd have wanted to keep the thing. I thought about it, but I was already paying for its food, so I decided against it. Still, it was quite a nice cat, genetically recodified to be sociable, clean, and not smell, of course. I dread to think what it was like to have a cat around the house in your day, when they were all natural. The suspected cat killer is hardly the first disagreeable punter I've had to deal with. After all, if we get called out, it's never because something good has happened, or they just want to express their gratitude that everything has been working a treat for the past 2 years. If they bell us, something's up. Sometimes they're nice, because they see us as the face of the solution to their problem, rather than the face of the problem itself. They trust that we can fix it, only they expect the reparation to be quicker and less disruptive than it usually is. As far as domestic repairs go, we generally mean 3 things to your average middle stratum. There's a catastrophe in the house, their life will be turned upside down for too long, and some stranger from the lower stratum, who won't complain about being shouted at, will be hanging about in their intimate space. I don't let their attitude get to me, yet there was one lingering thing the lower stratum housekeeper said to me that did worm its way about my mind before she left. She said, "It must be hard being an tractor man." She showed sympathy, and that threw me. Her concern for me was written large over her face. It made me think about myself in a way I'm not sure I would have done if she hadn't opened her trap. I already know that it's not easy being rejected and belittled, so I don't need reminding of it, thank you. Sometimes sympathy is worse than scorn. Snobbery and indifference is par for the course. You deal with it and you forget about it. It's their ignorance, their problem. Then something like that knocks you sideways. Compassion. Kindness can be a killer. Well, I've had my whinge. I'll get over it. Tomorrow's another day. I'm off for a nice sleep. I have to save up my energy. They need us at maximum capacity at work. A busy patch is coming up. We have to be totally at the disposal of the company. I wonder if the Mrs. Battery is charged up. the following week. I'm awake now after a long sleep, and I have a bit of time to continue with my verbal scribbles. I've had an intensive few days of work, followed by an intensive sleep session. There were more system breakdowns than usual in the docking station. My poor half-napping body was constantly interrupted. I had to do some home strapping work at the weekend. But things are calming down now, so I can catch up with my one-way chit-chat with the dead and buried. As I've got older, and other folk on the slipnet say the same, I find that I need to spend more time sleeping so my body can keep on producing bioenergy. You get used to things, but you become less energy efficient with age. You also get grumpier. When my sleep is interrupted, I feel more edgy than I used to. I suppose if I had a job with less strap-in time, I could be awake as much as 14 hours a day, like I used to be during my youth. But it's healthier to get a good sleep. Having your bioenergy sucked out is not as bad as it sounds. You produce a surplus, especially when you don't exercise, like lazy me, and strap-ins can extract it cleanly, instead of burning up fossil fuel. Companies maximise not only our bodily energy, but also our brain utility. Putting your mind at the disposal of marketers is a varied affair. Sometimes you barely notice it going on, at other times it can play with your mind, or give you headaches. But the strapping guardians note the effects, and you don't get the painful programs forced on you if you're reacting too badly. Cheerily works with a big advertising company that has recently brought out a deal that allows you to get extra bonus time. All you have to do is undergo what's called an ad flush. They implant a cerebral chip into your scalp, which allows you to get loads of neuroads flashing through your head. Depending on the ad flush frequency, you can get from 10 minutes to 2 hours off work a day. I'm not the right profile to qualify for a 2-hour slot, but I do get half an hour off every now and then, thanks to my NPX grade ad chip implant. I have a couple of ad flushes to do this evening as it happens. If I was younger, I could qualify for bigger bonuses, but too many ad flushes are not recommended at my age. While you're getting the ad flush, there are all sorts of brain analyses going on. Many of the goods and services that ads deal with are beyond what I can afford. I used to wonder why they were trying them out on me. A guy on the slipnet told me that ad companies are not really after what can be squeezed from my meager pockets. They're interested in the way my brain reacts. I never cease to be surprised, and a bit flattered to tell the truth, that my little old brain can be of interest to anyone. I suppose that at some basic level it works like anybody else's grey matter. It must do, otherwise they wouldn't use it as a guinea pig. If my brain responds positively, they'll use the ad to try and get richer folk to splash out on whatever it is they're trying to sell. It's all very clever. The lady who made me the offer took the trouble to explain it to me in a personalised neurocall. She was very nice. By the way, must be about time for my ad flush now. Oh yes, here we go. Maybe I'll get flashed a new ad. I'm back. No new ads, unfortunately. Just the same old ones again. There was one for my company. Studies show that 86% of Cheerily users are more successful in their personal life. Shite-Extractor economize on time, so Cheerily users have more time and energy available for themselves and for their employers. It's a win-win situation. The employer's team performs better, and employees are more confident performers. Or something along those lines. I know it pretty much off by heart by now, but I'll spare you the rest. Where do they get that 86% from? Good old Cheerily. They've even got a trusty statistic to support their case. I'm lucky to work for the leading company in the sector. You give your company the better part of your human potential, but you can do what you like with the rest. Well, a portion of the rest. You need recuperation time to get all your energy and mental capacities back into a decent enough state to be usable on your own terms. But at least you get the pleasure of knowing that you sometimes use your full potential. In periods of little activity, it doesn't always feel like we're being pushed enough. Still, you have to accept things as they are with simplicity, otherwise you go round the bend. I've seen a couple of people who have gone down that road in my time. They usually come to a sticky end. losing what they've worked for. It's sad to think about, so I won't bother thinking about it. I remember there was this educational neuromentary talking about a philosopher who spent all his time reading books, learning quotations in Latin and Greek, and even writing them all over the walls and ceilings of his study. He worked his poor brain into a fury with head-spinning philosophical conundrums. How silly those bookish idiots appear to us today when computers do so much of the head work. One day, as he was looking out of his study window, he saw one of his peasants lugging heavy equipment about, stopping to take a pause, sipping some wine and eating some bread. On seeing this, the philosopher had a revelation. It occurred to him that this ignorant peasant, who couldn't read or write, had found the secret of a life of simplicity. He practiced in his daily routine the kind of unassuming serenity the philosopher had been looking for in all of his daft books year upon year. I suppose you could say that there is a kind of eternal simplicity, despite all our technological advances. Maybe I'm lucky in that I have a piece of it, without having to lug a cartload of timber or whatnot. You mustn't take things too seriously, or waste time asking probing questions. That's what I say. Not that it's always easy. There are times when you can't help asking questions that don't have easy answers. But questioning is an activity that is best avoided, no doubt about that. Whenever I get awkward question syndrome, I take a head-and-o relaxant or stimulant, play virtual fighting, have neurosex, watch a low-level neurodrama, or traipse around the shop screen arcades, asterisks. Most of our shopping is window shopping. When we want a new look, for example, we look at screens that measure us and show pictures and holograms of ourselves in the clothes that interest us. If we're willing to pay for it, the shop makes or packs it up for us. As resources are scarcer than in your day, we buy and throw away fewer things. When we're done with something, we can hand it in to a return bank and get a deposit that gives us a discount on our next purchase. Holidays provide a welcome break. True, the transition is sometimes troubling. You don't know how to use all that free time when it lands on you. I try not to be strapped in some of the time. Travel holidays are nice, though not always the change of air that you expect. The standard routes are too well trodden and too busy to be a source of real surprise. When I was young and impressionable, I would hear, "You must go to such and such a place," but I rarely enthused once I tested it out for myself. They're often a bit samey, carefully preserved, pretty but lifeless tourist-packed shells in the middle of an urban sprawl. Maybe I'm overlooking something. I had a Slipnet forum chat with someone who's been to the moon. He told us, his audience, that it was amazing at first, but the novelty wore off after a few days, and you realise you're stuck in a building enjoying much the same technotainment as on Earth. Only instead of doing familiar stuff on the blue planet, which, he says, is an amazing sight from space, you do it in a lunar station on an unfamiliar rock, wondering what the next day's crater outing is going to bring. Every now and then, a no-go Ray Diplas gets awarded Safe Travel Area, and that's interesting, if you can get there before the rush, before it gets the novelty smacked out of it by services that give the place so many conveniences that you barely have the sense of going somewhere new. Oh dear, I'm moaning or prattling or both. I think that means that it's time to sleep.